Hi, everyone. We're so glad you're here with us today. Welcome to today's program on press freedom and journalists under threat 1 year into Russia's full-scale war of aggression against Ukraine. Journalists in both countries have responded valiantly in insisting on their right to provide independent, accurate, and piercing news coverage that serves the public's interest. I'm Rachel Oswald, and I'm welcoming you on behalf of the National Press Club Journalism Institute and the National Press Club's Press Freedom Team. As the nonprofit affiliate of the National Press Club, the Institute powers journalism in the public interest. We have a live transcription closed captioning option available during this program. If you are joining us on a desktop or laptop computer, you can enable this at any time by finding the CC Live Transcription button in the navigation menu. Click the Show Subtitle and the closed captioning will start. You can also disable this at any point by clicking Hide Subtitle. We'll be recording this program and a link to the video will be emailed to you, so if you miss something, don't worry, you'll have a chance to catch it a second time. Highlights from the video will also appear on our website and in our newsletter with the video. If you aren't already receiving the Institute's daily newsletter for journalists, you can subscribe now. This program is designed as a conversation, and we hope you'll join in with comments and questions. Please share questions anytime in the Q&A queue. We'll be monitoring them and responding later in the program. The Press Freedom Team conceived of this event as we were thinking about how we wanted to mark the 1-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. With so many events taking place to mark the occasion, we wanted to have a discussion that centered the human toll this war is taking on a different type of first responder, the journalists, Ukrainian and Russian, who've experienced tremendous personal and professional challenges in the last year, all as they strive to continue to follow a calling to cover the war, sometimes moving toward danger, and to expose uncomfortable truths, sometimes at considerable personal sacrifice. And now it's my honor to introduce this program's moderator, Jessica Jarrett, who leads Voice of America's award-winning press freedom coverage. With a background in press freedom and international news, Jessica has worked for organizations including the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists and the Times of London. She has a master's degree in war, media, and society from the University of Kent at Canterbury, with a focus on propaganda, the press, and conflict. Jessica, over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and I really want to take time just to thank the National Press Club's Journalism Institute and the National Press Club's Press Freedom Team for hosting such an important conversation. Welcome to everyone who's joined us today, and hello to our guests. It's such an honor to spend time with you. Today we have with us Lisa Tripunova. She's worked as a special reporter of the Russian Independent Novaya for the past 5 years. In her articles, she's covered problems in healthcare, education systems, charity, and immigration. The Russian government recently revoked the newspaper's media license because of its position on the war in Ukraine. We will later be joined by Olga Rudenko, the editor-in-chief of the Kyiv Independent in Ukraine. Prior to 2022, she was the managing editor of the Kyiv Post. Her fledgling media outlet, The Independent, has quickly become a key source of credible and impactful English language news coverage of the war in Ukraine. And we're also joined today by Anastasia Tichenko, she's a human rights reporter and news presenter with Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty's Russian service based in Prague since 2021. She joined RFERL in Moscow in 2017 as a reporter covering the deteriorating rights situation in Russia and has spent significant time in Ukraine. Today, we're here to discuss the war. It was particularly for journalists in Ukraine and Russia. This war is one that could be framed as an ideological battle for freedoms and for independence. Russian disinformation before the invasion, the claims of denazification of genocide were used to try to justify Putin's war. And in Russia, the war has sounded the death knell for an independent media long under assault. As Ukraine's journalists rose to the challenge to report on the war for local and foreign audiences, many of our Russian journalists have found themselves adapting to report from exile or trying to find new ways to reach audiences back home under increasing censorship. So war coverage can bring these nuanced conversations and even tensions around ethics, the role of media, whether it's even possible to remain neutral. Even at VOA, where at the Press Freedom Desk we've covered the media role in documenting war crimes and Putin's censorship efforts, we've come across challenges, as some of you may have seen in our reporting last week over the hiring of some journalists who previously worked for Russian-backed media. Today, we're going to dig into some of those issues and hear perspectives on what coverage of this war means, how the invasion has affected media in Russia and Ukraine, and what stories are missing in the US and foreign coverage. I'd like to go first really to Anastasia. You were the former Moscow correspondent and part of RFERL, which has been hit with Putin's labeling of foreign media or any critics as foreign agent, and I think has sort of resulted in fines that stand around $17.5 million at the moment. The website is now blocked in Russia. As someone who was in Russia before the war and has seen the sort of ramping up of Putin's aggression towards the media, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how has the media environment been restricted in the years up to the war, and what changed after the February 24 invasion?
So about pressure on Russia media, it's a long story normally. And I'd like to begin better from the eve of 2021, when our government decided to declare as foreign agents, not just media, but people individually. That was very scary because no one knew what did it mean and what punishment might be, what fines. So they almost immediately added 5 persons in this list of foreign agents as individuals, and 2 of them were my colleagues. Soon after that, our management decided to literally evacuate us from Russia because they decided that it became too dangerous to be there, to cover news and to tell the truth, not to try to be, I don't know, to play with the rules, and to continue to be balanced, to do your job. So part of my colleagues were evacuated to Kiev, to Ukraine, and part to Prague, to Czech Republic. So, but you must understand that in this time, the constitution of Russia was already changed, and it was clear that Putin might be president for 1 more period. Alexei Navalny has already came back to Russia before he was poisoned, and they put him in jail. So the situation became more and more tense. And we were likely to be evacuated because soon Medusa also, like a media, was declared like foreign agent. And then what is even worse, there is a media called Project, which were declared as an undesirable organization. And that's normally mean that it puts all staff and even financial donors at risk of significant jail time. So they just had to be closed because no one wants to lose their freedom. And then, so there were 2 lists of foreign agents and of undesirable organizations, and it was growing fast during this half a year, and then war began. And with war, the Russian government decided to adopt new laws, which normally killed at all freedom of speech, because they prohibit to call war as a war. It was just a special operation, and it was even prohibited to stand up for peace. I mean that people who are going out on streets now in Russia just with paper, which is and written words like no wars, they might be detained. So now it's so hard to be against this war, and at the time be in Russia, that you have the only opportunity to tell the truth and to fight for people's right only being outside, like being in another country, being abroad, like we are now.
And what have you been doing at RFERL to make sure that the media, I know your websites are blocked, there's this, with these laws, as you said, there's like even a security risk of people sharing information to you. And those laws, do they sort of carry connotations for audiences? Is there that it sort of works to delegitimize or discredit media? I just sort of wonder how you are dealing with the challenges of still saying to your audiences, we're credible and we're here, and how you're physically getting the news in when websites are blocked and there's more and more efforts to try to silence those independent voices?
So we're not the only media which is blocked in Russia. Facebook is also blocked. Instagram is also blocked. So I guess people are getting used to use VPN. And also we have application which is not blocked yet. The situation is changing quite quickly, but it's not. So also we have a huge team which is working on this topic to make sure that our audience can get information somehow with some special links and so on. It's technical questions, but we still do that. With war, and especially with mobilization, interest to our information grew, because I think that people now don't get the truth from government medias, and they're looking for it. And so they come to us, they try to find a way to read us, or to read our colleagues. I mean, just read it for you.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you. Lisa, I wanted to come to you. I mean, you work for one of the most renowned Russian media outlets, Novaya, that's just known for its investigations and taking on some really incredibly difficult subjects in Russia. And as a result, your staff have come under threats and attacks, assassinations even. How was it for your staff to finally reach that point where in the weeks after the war, there were the increasing pressure that finally forced Novaya to have to close? How's it been to finally have to leave and then start up again and reconnect with your audiences?
I mean, it was a tragedy. It was horrible. I mean, Novaya was like a family to me, and for my editors who were founders of Novaya, it was their whole life. The newspaper was their whole life, and the newspaper would celebrate 30 years this year, and it has an incredible history. And yes, it was not always like good. We had 6 journalists murdered throughout the years. We've been threatened a lot of times. Me personally, we've been beaten during protests. We've been surveilled. We got a lot of lawsuits for our articles. And these laws, Anastasia mentioned already, foreign agents and undesirable organizations have been introduced, which made our work even more difficult. But somehow we managed to continue our coverings. And then this incredible thing happened. My editor-in-chief, Dmitry Muratov, won Nobel Peace Prize, which felt like a light, I'd say. And we in Novaya Gazeta felt like we have immunity for a little short period of time. We didn't know how much it will last, but we felt like we are safe for now. But when the war started and new laws have been introduced and been signed, fakes about Russian army, and which could individuals face up to 3 years in prison. But if you're a part of a group of people who spread fakes about Russian army, which any editorial office can fall under this description, you can face up to 15 years. And we already in Russia have a precedent. A journalist, Maria Ponomarenko from online media Rus News, have been sentenced to 6 years in prison for a post on social media when she told about a dead attack on city of Mariupol in Ukraine. So she got 6 years for the post. And we felt like we have no choice. Either we are gonna be, either we are going to jail, or we stop covering what was happening in Ukraine. And there was like a middle choice. We could censor our articles, and it helped for a while. Novaya Gazeta started to, censor the word war. We put special military operation into quotation marks, but it didn't help. it didn't help. We got strikes from Roskomnadzor, it's a governmental censorship entity. We got other warnings from other governmental organizations, and yeah, our license had been revoked. And that means that we cannot continue working as a newspaper anymore. We had to close. And yes, like I said from the beginning, it was a tragedy for all of us. I still cannot believe that I'm not a part of the newspaper anymore. It's been horrible.
That does sound really tough, especially the amount of work and investigations that Novaya, all of you are known for. During that time, did you hear much from your audiences as they started to see this sort of middle ground that you described of the changes of trying to find a way to still report what was happening, but walk that tightrope of trying to stay clear of the regulator?
I mean, our audience, I'd say it's pretty smart, and they understood that we had to adapt to these new rules. And they didn't criticize us for censoring the word war. Well, at least I didn't experience any of that. But you know, like I said, it didn't last for long. The war started on February 24th, and we had to suspend our work on March 24, 28. So we worked for less than a month, and then we had to stop. My colleagues who stayed in Russia, they opened some new projects. They tried to continue their work and coverage of war, but they all have been silenced too. Like one website was blocked like very soon in Russia, and the other, like a journal, like a side project of Novaya Gazeta, has been also, its license has been also revoked. And yeah, I mean, Russian government has many methods how to silence media. They learned it not now, they learned it from years ago, and yeah, they're pretty good at it, which is bad for us, obviously. But yeah, and there is also the colleagues who left the country. They opened another project which is called Novaya Gazeta Europe, and they continue to work. Right now they are very brave, and I admire them, but they have been also blocked. I think it was like less than 2 weeks that they worked normally, and then they've been blocked. And an editor-in-chief of Novaya Gazeta Europe, Kirill Martynov, my ex-colleague, he was labeled as foreign agent, which makes his life difficult too. But since he left the country, it's a little easier for him. But yeah, still, what can I say else? It's been a challenge.
Yeah. I wonder if either of you could go back to this issue of blocking. So when Russia blocks access to a website, you mentioned, Anastasia, that people are becoming very familiar with VPN. I mean, Russian censorship, it's not like a new thing that happened along with the war. Like, there's been efforts for a long time. So far, are you managing to stay ahead of the censors? Is it possible to still use VPN and other means to try to get in? I don't know with RFERL as well, whether you're doing anything with like the old methods of shortwave radio, or just anything to try to just make sure that that information is flowing.
So for sure, VPN works well. So if you have VPN on, so you can get access to, I guess, to almost any website which is blocked. And Telegram isn't blocked, and we have now our pages there, and also YouTube still not blocked. I hope they won't block it, because our audience there increased so much, especially after mobilization, and we are concentrating now there. We are making videos and trying to continue our job. So there is still some sources how we can go through it. Briefly, another question which scares me a lot is that I'm a little bit worried about our audience when they're getting in contact with us. I mean, when people are trying to tell their story about their position against war. And we have cases when people have fines because they just give us an interview or give an interview to TV Rain. And we don't want to put them in danger. So that's the next question and next difficult situation for Russian journalists.
Have you seen any cases of sources, people who give information or give interviews, being retaliated against or threatened? Is that something you've been seeing in Russia?
Sorry, I didn't get the beginning.
Oh, sorry. Have you seen any instances of people who have been sources or have given interviews to independent media being retaliated against inside Russia, either with threats of legal action or just threats of any kind?
So there is a story of a Russian journalist, the girl who helped Ukrainian refugees, and she gave an interview to TV Rain, and she have now has a fine like 50,000 rubles. It's like a little less than $1,000, I guess. I don't know what is the course now. And another story of a guy who is also stand up for peace, and he gave us an interview, not to Radio Liberty, but to one of our project, and he also has fines. And I guess that's just last few weeks. It happened in the last few weeks. So it might be a new tool for pressure and for propaganda.
I see you have a question from the audience asking, as far as you're aware, are Russians being able to see or hear news from outside the country, such as such as VOA or other sources from journalists who are in neighboring countries? Aside from VPN, I guess, like radio and TV, is there any kind of access to independent news on those mediums?
Sure, from any, I guess.
Can I elaborate a little bit on VPN? It's kind of related to the question. Like Anastasia said, that people are getting used to use VPN more and more these days because, probably you know, Facebook and Instagram have been blocked in Russia, and many people use social media, not for like reading news, but just for their personal use. But what I wanted to say is that Russian government found pretty advanced ways how to block VPN sources as well. So once a new VPN appears on the internet, this VPN source is easily targeted and blocked as well. So you have to find another VPN, and it becomes very like it becomes very difficult to find a VPN that would work constantly in Russia. But also there is another problem. People know how to use VPN in big cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, but if you speak about far regions in Russia, small towns and villages, and I can speak for them because for the past 5 years, I've been traveling a lot through Russia. People there live on the edge of poverty, and sometimes they don't even have a computer, sometimes they don't even have a phone in their families. And if you speak about returning to the question, how do we get another sources of information? We don't have any. Sometimes we only have a TV at their home, and that's the only source of information, which is 100% now is a propaganda. So if you want to reach an independent source, you have to be smart. You have to know how to use digital devices professionally. You have to be able to know how to divide which is a trustworthy source and which is not. And I know in foreign countries there are also like media that you shouldn't really trust. And Russian people who live in towns and villages, we don't know how to do that because they were not taught how to do that. which is a problem. And part of my job was to somehow educate people. When I meet them, I was trying to tell them what is a trustworthy source, like for example, Novaya Gazeta in Russia, and which is not, like a Channel 1 in Russia, which is a total propaganda, which produces fakes, but they're not punished for them. I hope I answered the question.
You did. I think that's actually really interesting, because I sometimes sort of forget that, like, Russia's such a vast country and there's these pockets that don't have media literacy, just have maybe very limited access to news. I wonder if you could expand a little bit more on that, in terms of, do you meet resistance from these people? Do they understand what you're trying to explain to them about the difference of what they're hearing from Channel 1 as opposed to what they might hear from Radio Free Europe about how news is created?
When I first try to tell people that, like, this channel is a propaganda, they feel very defensive. They are like, no, that's impossible. I trust Putin. I trust what he says, and this is truth. But when I start to ask them questions, okay, why do you think your pension is so low? Or why do you not have a gas in your village? Why do you think it's bad? And they always say, well, this is a local official who doesn't want to work, he's a corrupted. And I try to elaborate, but he works for like a higher official. And this higher official works for Putin. And do you see the logic? And they start to think, and they start to understand something. And not all people go further. That most of their concerns are about their small salaries, their bad houses, lack of gas, water, and we don't think about such big things as, political situation in general. But I think we have to start from small things, from basic stuff, and then later go to like more, how do I say, more,
I guess start small and then just build up to like the bigger issue, the bigger problem.
Yes. For example, if you speak about war, the people in regions may not understand why we even started this war. They can simply believe that there are some Ukrainian Nazis who kill children in Ukraine, which is absurd. But they will not understand like the real situation. What they will understand is, and they will try to like figure out why, for example, their son is drafted into the army. And when they feel that this, like they would understand that this is bad, like, I mean, their only son goes to the army and he will probably kill. Then after that, they will try to think about the reasons why he is sent to the army. Then they will try to think, like, why do we even have to send people in the army? What are the reasons for this war, and all that stuff? So we have to start from personal, and then we have to go to like other more difficult and complicated issues of the story. I mean, I hope you understand what I meant to say.
Oh, definitely. I was actually going to ask Anastasia if you could pick up from there. You mentioned earlier about how Radio Free Europe has looked at sort of issues around mobilization. Are there issues related to the war that Russian audiences, that are suddenly seem to be making Russian audiences either question the official narrative being fed to them, or to just sort of provoke a little bit more curiosity and questioning about what's happening? Are you seeing that in your reporting?
How do I get it? About how do I understood it? Or what do you mean?
What are you seeing for, like, what issues are your audiences in Russia, like mobilization? Are there issues that are making them start to question why Russia has this war in Ukraine?
Yeah, I guess mobilization was one of the most important, just because it was the moment when the war came almost to every house in Russia. And when it touched normally your son, you are starting to ask more questions. The other, I guess it's the main one, maybe also when Russian government starts to declare as a foreign agent more and more people, and there was some people who you know exactly. I mean, your favorite singer, a politician, which you've heard about it. Then you started to ask why he or why she, what he or she done wrong if he is in this list of foreign agents. So when these all problems are getting closer to you, you are asking more questions. That's maybe it's somehow play on our side that they're making this. That's not mistakes, I guess, but they're making this movement which touch more people.
Okay, that's interesting. I wonder as well, particularly interested in sort of Russian disinformation, which built and sort of laid the groundwork a little bit for this. How much countering of Russian disinformation do you find you have to do in your reporting, or is it just that there's just some audiences are just so entrenched in the official narrative now that they are resistant to hearing any sort of truth about what's happening?
I just guess that there are people who are not ready to hear the truth. They're not ready to accept it. And I had my personal example with my parents. So normally my parents are from Donetsk region, from a small village, which is called Marinka. And this small village is totally destroyed now. There are just stones and nothing else. It's even worse than Mariupol, because Mariupol is a big city and the village Marinka is a small one. And it was totally destroyed from the February. And I decided, I also had some arguments with my parents about this war, because they were kind of victims of propaganda. And I tried to send them my reports, but it didn't help at all. So I decided to make a big report about this city, their village. I spoke with their friends, with some relatives, and made a big material. And I hoped so much that it would help. But even this didn't help at all. My mom said that you can't know the truth and both sides are guilty. And my father, which I guess maybe he's even more victim of propaganda than my mother, he just stopped talking to me. And that was awful, because in this moment, I understood that I have no other options how to influence. I don't know what to do. I've done everything. So I guess there are people who are so much in this that they're just not ready, and we can't fight for them, but we can, I mean, journalists who are trying to tell the truth, to cover these problems, but we can fight for these who are hesitating, and there are a lot of them. I don't know, forgetting the question, I'm sorry.
I think it's a really interesting perspective, and it actually sort of brings me on to like this. I mean, the war affects so many of you just on a very personal level. Lisa, I know you came to the US, I guess, was it last year, just after threats? And I read your amazing and very distressing, if I'm honest, account in Novaya about having to come through the southern border and waiting in detention centers, I guess, with ICE.
Yes.
To come through, and even before that, in Russia, you'd endured threats from police, and going back to sort of 2018 about your reporting. Would you be comfortable just sharing a little bit about like your experiences of having to sort of flee and resettle here?
You mean before like threats that I encountered, or after?
After, maybe, like, if you could just explain a little bit about your experiences, of like what was the moment when you realized you had to leave, and then how you made that journey to the US?
Yeah, sure. So there were two main reasons why my family personally had to leave. So the first one, it was for me as a journalist. This law on discrediting Russian army made my reportings a criminal offense. They all been deleted in Novaya Gazeta website, but still for Russian government, there is no such thing as like a law. They can charge you with charge you even for the articles that have been deleted and removed from the website. So they call it a continuous crime, and they can easily charge you for that one too. So this was, and I obviously didn't want to go to jail. So that's one reason. The second reason, it wasn't planned, but on the second day of war, it was my birthday, and my then boyfriend proposed to me, and that meant that I have to care not only for myself but for my husband too, and we are a family now. And since there were a lot of rumors about mobilization at that time, I couldn't bear my husband to go to the front, and he would not agree to go to the front, to the army, because he's a very anti-war person as well. He's Armenian and he faced war too. You know how it is, and his parents were refugees as well. And for evading service, you face up to 2 years in prison too. So we both could end up in prison, so we had to leave. And if you ask why US, there were many reasons too, as for me as a journalist, but the main reason is because my family is here, my parents. But since we fled urgently, we were not able to submit for any visas, and it's quite a challenge for Russians now to get an American visa too, because there is no officially there is no embassy in Russia, US embassy, and you have to apply for visa in other countries. But since the air communications were closed and there were not so many choices where you can go, where you fly, so we chose the shortest path, and we came to Mexico, and we came to the border and requested a political asylum on the border, which is a legal procedure. But since we crossed the border without a visa, we have to be put into a deportation process, which is also like a normal procedure. There were many people like us who flee Russia the same way, and since there were so many of us, and the immigration, like the facility on the border was full of immigrants, they have to put us into other detention facilities, which I call immigration jail, which is basically it is. And I spent there 16 days. When I tell this story, how I spent this time in this jail, especially to American people, they are horrified. They didn't know that like people are treated like this there. But for me personally, it was like a small vacation. Because there was nothing horrifying in these facilities. People, like the employees of this facility, treated us equally. They didn't violate any of our rights. They were very polite, and I can say any bad things about that facilities. Now Biden and ICE, what is it? DHS, Department of Homeland Security, introduced another way of requesting asylum on the border. You have to use a special app on the phone, and you have to apply for a meeting with an ICE officer on the border, and after that you are admitted to the US territory. So it's much simpler, but it wasn't like this when I came. So I spent the 16 days in the immigration jail. My husband, a little less than a month. We were held in different facilities. We were not allowed to talk or anything. And now, because we are put into the deportation process, we have to face a trial in the immigration court. which will be in April. I'm very looking forward to it, and also nervous because I'm in Georgia, which is a violet state, which means it's mostly Republican, but Atlanta leans to a Democratic Party. And from what I know from the statistics, Georgia judges are quite strict when it comes to immigration laws. But I'm pretty confident in my case, and I hope everything will be fine, and I will be granted asylum, my husband as well, and we will continue. I would, when I am granted, I will be continue to work as a journalist here on the US territory. I really hope so, because I miss reporting so much. I wasn't able to do much reporting lately, but I really hope I will do in the future.
Is it hard, as a reporter who sort of covered these issues for so much, to almost have to sit on the sidelines for the last year? Are there stories that you see or hear about and you think, I could have covered this, or I would have done this differently?
Yes, I miss it so much. I mean, right now in Russia, most of the most interesting stories are in the regions, are in small towns, because they feel the war coming more than anyone else, because their children are drafted to the army first, like in regions like Buryatia or Chechen Republic. I've been there, by the way, and it's pretty dangerous. And I would really love to go there and talk to the people and see why they support the war, even if their children have to go to the army and are killed. There's so much interesting there, and I think Western audience would like to understand that too. And yes, I miss it, but I was able to cover some events from here. My personal achievement was when I had to go to New York and cover an event, an auction, where my editor, Dmitry Muratov, auctioned off his Nobel Peace Prize to help Ukrainian refugees, and the amount was crazy, like $103.5 million. My article wasn't that good from a journalistic point of view. It wasn't very good reporting itself, because it was my first auction. I never covered auctions before, but the event itself was so inspiring, and that it brought hope for me. And yeah, I would love to cover more of such events, and I would love to have so that people have more such initiatives in different countries, not only in the US but in Europe as well. I know they are, and I hope they are covered too in Western media.
Thank you. That actually brings, there's a question from Sam in our audience, which I think relates a little bit to what you were saying about the regions and what we spoke about a little bit earlier, about when the war hits on a personal level tends to be when the Russian audience is reacting. Sam asks, have the deaths and casualties among Russian troops had an impact on the greater Russian society beyond their immediate families? Are families even receiving news of the deaths of their sons who are at war?
So that's a difficult question, because normally we don't know how much people died. I mean, how much Russian died in this war. But we do have some news and even some videos from regions with this. Normally, it looks like boxes with dead soldiers, which came to regions, and of course cemeteries which are full of new places. So normally, I guess they do have news if someone died during the war. I mean, mothers, but we also have some messages from frontline that there are a lot of troops there. There are a lot of dead people there, and it takes time to send their bodies to Russia. And that's why some families even doesn't know what has happened to their child or to their husband and so on. And in general, this question of losses is kind of secret for everyone, how much from one side, from another side. It's true for Ukraine also, because we don't know how much soldiers died from this side and from Russian also. But I guess that death influence also somehow on this question, and they are trying to look for information, what was going on, and especially maybe that's why they are looking more for news about frontline, because if we have some reports what is going on in Bakhmut or in some this dangerous places, we have a lot of views. I guess they have some information, for example, that their son or their husband is somewhere there in this region, and they're just trying to look for situation.
Following on from that, we actually have another question from the audience, from Dan, who asks, it seems that older Russian people accept the government propaganda about the war more readily than the younger generation. Is there any sign that the older people are changing their opinions and maybe recognizing the true situation? And separately, how much are younger Russians accepting the government line on war? I wonder as well if that changes depending on whether you're in one of the big metro centers or somewhere a little bit further out.
I can speak from the first part of the question, if the opinion of older people changes somehow. Well, I can speak for Novaya Gazeta because Novaya's audience was mostly people from 45 till and older. And well, I can say that our audience grew a lot, and like we were able to somehow change the opinion of these people throughout the years. But what I can also say is that both generations can impact on each other, because so I can make a personal example. For example, my grandmother was a very pro-Putin person, but she believes me as her granddaughter. And what I told her about elections and corruption system and all other criminal things that are happening in Russia, she believed me because I'm her granddaughter. And I think if more people, more younger people can persuade them, their grandparents, their older generation, it would be good. But from a yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous, and I forgot what I wanted to add to this.
No, this is all fine, and it's honestly, it's so interesting to hear from people, especially where you have been able to travel to these regions and maybe have a perspective that we don't always get in the West of what people in smaller areas think and how they understand sort of news and media literacy. I think is such an interesting and valuable perspective. It's very helpful.
I can add
yes,
about,
please.
Normally, yeah. So we have these two examples. Example of Liza's grandma who believes her, and example of my parents who don't believe to their daughter. They don't believe their daughter. And about this question from Dan. So another problem in Russia now that there are a lot of people who are afraid to tell the truth, and who are afraid to tell their opinion openly, because they're afraid to be in jail. And it's even funny that sometimes when I saw some polls, and there are people who are trying to say, and there is a question about war, and someone is starting to say, so this war, oh, I'm sorry, special operation. So people are even correcting themselves not to tell this word. So they are so scary to have fines, to lose their freedom. That's ridiculous. So, and we don't have any polls that we can trust for 100%. There is an organization which is called Chroniki, they kind of try to investigate this question about how much people really support war. And their last study says that they're quite sure that like 20% in Russia do support this special operation, so-called, but no, 22%, and 20% of population do not support it. They're against war and they want Russia to take their army from Ukraine and so on. But this 60% of population, they kind of lost from our understanding what is going on in their heads. So there is no like answer to this question for sure, but it's something like that information which I have.
Leading on from that, I wonder, what is it like for Russian media to try to cover the war? Is it easy or advisable to even go into Ukraine and be able to report on the front lines about what's happening? Are you seeing any kind of distrust or tension between Russian and Ukraine media? I mean, it's, you know, a place at a time where emotions are running high, and I don't know if that's something that you've come across.
So as our organization has a Russian service and also Ukrainian service, for sure we don't have any problems with it. They help us, they send us their videos from frontline and so on. But there is also always some kind of tension when you meet a new person from Ukraine and you don't know what has happened in its life, in his life or in her life, especially if this person has lost someone or his house was destroyed or so. You're very careful with this. So when I'm looking for a new contact through Ukrainian journalists, I'm very careful with all my words. I'm kind of scary to touch feelings, to talk. So it's always very, very uncomfortable situation. But with our services, of course, everything is clear and quite friendly.
Do you find that you can, like, oh, sorry, go on, sorry. Please go ahead.
Yeah, if I can add something too. I personally also didn't feel any I didn't have any problems with Ukrainian journalists. But what I can also like confirm from what Anastasia said, but I also feel this tense. And maybe you've heard of a situation with TV Rain in Latvia when a journalist spoke about Russian army and his words were interpreted as like he supported Russian army, but what he meant was like he just like I can say cared about these boys who are killed. They are killed from both sides, but as a Russian, he also wanted to pay attention to them. And this whole situation was a huge scandal in Latvia, and the media license was of this TV channel was revoked. I think it was revoked. I don't know if they appealed, but it was revoked and they had to go to another country. And yes, I can totally say that you have to be careful a lot about what you are about what you're saying, especially about Russian army and everything what comes with it. Yeah.
Yes, and price of mistake for Russian journalists is now is the higher ever. You have to be so careful with your words that it makes your work some kind of difficult because you are nervous, like in general, and you have to just to control everything. That's a pressure, kind of.
And in points of the immigration, it also, if for example you are based in Latvia and you said something that Latvian government doesn't want to hear and doesn't accept, I mean, and you already settled there, where do you have to go? Like you have to start from the beginning. And what if you say the same, like another thing that another government will not accept? Where do you have to go? Like when you don't have a place, when you don't have a home, when you're a journalist in exile, it becomes very difficult. And yes, I'm also afraid to say something bad about immigration system in the US, though I probably will not be charged for any of my words. But as as a person who you know how it can be, I feel a little not scared, but you know, I have to be careful with all my words about anything that happens in the country where you have to decide to settle.
But at the same time, I can understand Latvia government and all these countries which are not far from Russia, and they don't want invasion, and they are very careful with all Russian people. And when war, and I can see it on the street, living in Prague, in Czech Republic, when the war began, I was in a shop, and there was an old lady who heard that I was speaking Russian with my friend, but my friend was from Kyrgyz Republic, and she knew Russian for sure, and she told us, "Where are you from?" And I was just keeping silence because I understood that was dangerous situation. I didn't want any conflict, and I told him, "You answer." And he told me, "I'm from Kyrgyz Republic," so on. And she said, "I'm happy that you are not from Russia because you are all invasion. You are enemies. You are going to put once again Soviet government here." And so I guess there are a lot of people like this in other countries who are just, they are afraid, they're scary they don't want this situation to be repeated. I mean, with Soviet Union, with these invasions, with this Russian army going to another countries and trying to pull their regime.
That's really interesting. Actually brings me to another point, just as we're going into like the second year of the war, and it's like the war isn't contained to, like, physically it's contained to Russia and Ukraine now, but there's the neighboring countries and the sort of ripple effect. What do you think that audiences or even foreign journalists should be aware of about how these tensions might affect the media environment in countries? I mean, I was going to say Belarus, but that's like a bad option because they were going through a similar situation to Russian media. But how can this sort of battle of censorship from Putin play out in some of the other countries in the region? Do you think we'll see more censorship and more sort of tensions for independent media?
You mean in Russia?
In some of the sort of other countries outside of Russia, are we seeing in Kyrgyzstan or some of like the Balkan states, any sort of countries around that maybe were more friendly to Russia? Are we seeing any pressure on the journalists there in terms of how the war's covered?
I don't know about journalists, but I can definitely feel pressure on some countries and their societies, like Kazakhstan or especially Armenia. I can speak for Armenia because my husband is Armenian ethnically. Armenia got in a situation where the country is at war as well, and they previously they were the government asked for support from Russia to help them in the war with Azerbaijan. Now they are in a weird situation because they cannot ask for support from Russia because Russia is an aggressor, and at the same time they also have an enemy by their side. So they are like in a kind of trap, and well, they definitely feel a lot of pressure from Russia because Russia wants as many supporters as they can possibly get, but Armenia is like in the middle of nowhere. Well, I can't really speak about Kazakhstan, but what I know from my colleagues, Kazakhstan tries to lean against support of Russia, but at the same time, a lot is connected. The transportation, the gas. I mean, it's a very difficult choice for other governments, especially if their economics are not very prosperous, whether they want to support Russia or not. And yeah, there is no an easy choice there.
I wonder.
Yeah,
Oh, go on.
Sorry, I guess that there is some kind of pressure on Georgia also, because we can see stories that people who escaped from Russia when war began, and they already had their houses or some rental agreements, and they went from Georgia and tried to go back, and they didn't have the permission. It's mostly about some opposition leaders or some activists, so people who are talking in public about war and standing against it. So, but it's hard for me to give like a comment about it, because we should investigate it more, and it just from news what I've heard.
We'll be wrapping up soon, but I guess like one question I have that really remains is, you know, the Russian media, you are like this force pushing back against Putin and against the rolling back of civil liberties for so long, with the Russian media now sort of removed from the equation in terms of being physically in the country. What are the stories that you think need to be focused on? What are the stories that Russian audiences are most in need of at the moment?
Russian audience, I guess, truths about war, because it's not covered well with, it's not covered at all with Russian government media's what is going on when it touches some war crimes. For example, the story of Dnieper, when the house was destroyed and many people were killed because of Russian attack, and there was almost anything about it. They normally say that it's all air defense of Ukraine, which broke the house, destroyed the house. So Russian audience don't have a lot of stories like this. Don't hear the truth when there are people who were civilians and they were killed.
I guess so. Our common aim is to stop the war, and we have to make Russian audience so that we know the truth about the war, like Anastasia said. And one of the things that we can do is to tell more about these horrifying things that Russian government can do to a person, even if he is not like anti-war. It's just in general, we have to tell about all other injustices that the Russian government can do. Like, for example, yesterday there was this, I read this news article about a girl, a school student who drew an anti-war drawing at the lesson, and her father, he was also, I think he posted something anti-war in his social media. So her father was arrested, and she went to like a children's shelter. How do you call it in English? So this is a very bad example of what a government can do to simple people, and we have to make other people know that this can happen to them too. Even if you didn't do anything, even if you just draw a simple like a drawing, you can be sent to a shelter, you can go to jail for these things. And yes, I think we have to tell more about this. But as a reporter, I also have to tell that what I would do, I would go to this city, to this town, and talk to these people personally. And I feel like nowadays articles lack this sense of presence, and because most of the journalists left the country and they make these articles over the phone, they call people, and that's how they write this article. And if there are still some journalists left in the country, I would really advise them to go to places and talk to people personally, describe how they live, what their houses are, how they respond to awkward questions, to tricky questions. This is more effective, I think, and this will be more effective to other people who read these stories. Probably, if you read such a, present day story, you would start to think why things are like this, why they are so poor and still they support the war, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, but the worst thing in this case about the girl with the picture the girl who drew this picture, anti-war picture, that in this story there was a denunciation, I guess, that her teacher told to police or to someone that the girl drew this picture. And we can see that people they're against each other, even in such a small groups. And it's so hard to manage it and to see why do they do that. And I wanted to add that we have, for example, some operators in Russia, but we try not to put them also in some danger. And I mean that we don't ask them to shoot a lot of stories just because we're scary about them, about their freedom also. So we're so careful now. But we try to...
Yes, I said I would advise journalists to go there, but it's very dangerous. I have to add that too, because if you are noticed by local police or FSB, you can be arrested, you can be detained, you can be charged with fines and all that kind of stuff. It's very dangerous. I mean, I don't know how to solve this problem. I mean, I would be really glad to hear more stories from cities and towns, but I don't know how to how to solve this problem, because there are not so many journalists left, and if they stayed in Russia, they probably can't go there because it's dangerous. So this is a very tricky and complicated situation.
Yeah, we kind of like it when people just shooting themselves and telling their stories just because they've already decided to put it in some way, in some social rights. And we, of course, will take it and try to tell the stories for bigger audience. But normally to shoot it by ourselves, it's hard. And yeah, as it was mentioned, dangerous.
Yeah, it sounds such a challenging and difficult environment when you're up against so much to just to report the truth. We're coming to the end of our program, and I just wanted to give first to say thank you. Unfortunately, Olga was unable to join us from Ukraine today, but thank you so much for sharing so much about your experiences. I think we have time for just a couple of questions from the audience. One of them, I think, goes in very nicely into what we were just talking about. If the public isn't getting news of war, are the top government officials in Russia, are they getting news? And how is that outside information threatening Putin's status and control?
I can't answer.
Well, it's really hard to tell what news the government officials are reading. I mean, from before, I know that Putin, because you can see it from the Russian system when they order some services. We knew that Putin read and ordered Novaya Gazeta, so he probably read it. But now, I mean, it feels like he's totally isolated from the truth, from the independent news coverage. But I really can't comment. I hope they read something. I hope but we know how we should know how the other countries, the Western audience feels about this war. I hope they read it, but I'm not sure. According to their actions, I mean,
if they're reading it, maybe they're not understanding it in the way that we are.
Yes, totally.
This is an interesting question from Dan in our audience. Very interesting, actually. Is there any underground press that Russians have access to, similar to the old Soviet days? And there's a word here, sorry, I apologize to you both, as samizdat, like an underground press, like banned literature. Are you seeing any of those sort of old Soviet tactics at trying to fight back against this censorship resurfacing?
I'd say that we are all now underground because we are blocked, and we are kind of underground now, medias. So I haven't heard about a specific one, but we have some new, which are trying also to cover all these problems. But they're not the printed papers. Now it's a digital world.
And I can tell why they're not printed. Because, for example, when you decide to print a protest banner on a newspaper, you go to the publishing house or a small print shop, and they simply refuse to do that because they know that the consequences will follow. The police will come to you and probably arrest all your property or give you a fine or something, or arrest you. So there is no printed like protest newspapers, banners, or just simple like papers. No, they are not there. But yes, all these underground media, they transfer to digital world, to websites, but the websites are easily blocked. So, well, like what I can say, but they also transfer to Telegram, which is not blocked yet, like Anastasia said before. And there are so many Telegram channels that try to resist, try to spread truth, but still the audiences are not comparable. I mean, Channel 1, who has millions of viewers throughout the country, and a small Telegram channel, you know, it's not the same.
It's fascinating. Sadly, that is all the time I think we have today. I will just say there was like one question in chat that we will share with you, Lisa, afterwards. Someone asking about a specific case that had been profiled by Novaya Gazeta. We'll share that information with you afterwards because I think it's more specific to that. Thank you. This has just been so interesting, especially hearing about the experiences of how you've been pushing back against the censorship and how it's affected you personally. And I think really sort of getting into that depths of how people in Russia are understanding or trying to make sense of what is happening. So thank you very much for being with us today. And thank you to our audience, some really great questions there, and really appreciate everyone making the time to have such an important discussion today. I'm going to hand back to Rachel, and goodbye.
Thanks, Jessica. One final question though for our participants. Did anything you learn in the program today, how will it change and affect your work? Please let us know in the chat. It helps us inform future program planning. Thank you so much to Jessica and to our panel. You guys packed so much information into this hour. I apologize again that Olga wasn't able to join the discussion today, but I think we can all understand the demands she's under in running a news organization in the middle of a major war. To Liza and Anastasia, I learned so much from both of you, and I am personally so very sorry for all of the heartbreak that this war and Vladimir Putin's decisions have caused you both. Jessica, thank you for the expert moderation and adaptation on the fly this morning. And thank you all to the participants as well for your great questions and comments. We will be sharing a link to the video soon, along with a survey and additional resources, so you can keep mining this conversation for guidance. Thank you all again for being here. Stay well, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.